Price wars and power plays over global oil supplies. Ministers from the world's major exporters meet as prices hit a four-year low. But who is setting the agenda? And is politics having an impact on production? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. Together they account for around 80% of the world's crude oil reserves and about a third of global production. They're the 12 countries that make up the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries known as OPEC. But is the cartel's influence on the wane? And how much clout does the world's biggest exporter, Saudi Arabia, still have when it comes to balancing price and production? Ministers are wrestling with that dilemma at a meeting in the Austrian capital, Vienna, as oil prices sit at a near four-year low. The benchmark Brent crude has fallen by more than 30% since June, down from $115 a barrel to $76 on Thursday. Now, the fall in prices is down to weakening global demand, albeit still at record levels, and frankly, because there's just too much oil being produced. This is due in part to booming shale oil production in the United States, now the world's biggest producer. So who, if anybody, will be willing to cut production to prop up prices? Or are there other strategies at play to squeeze out rivals in an increasingly competitive market? Let's get the thoughts of our guests now. In Vienna, Cornelia Meyer, an independent energy expert and chairman and CEO of MRL Corporation. Joining us from London is Mark Lewis, Group Vice Chairman and Managing Director of Facts Global Energy London. And completing our panel, in Moscow is Mikhail Krushin, partner at the Russ Energy Consulting Agency. Welcome, all three of you, to Inside Story. Cornelia, this comes at a rather exciting times in the energy market, doesn't it? And the geopolitical dynamics at play. How important is this meeting right now?
Well, this meeting is sort of... Not much will happen at this meeting. I think we will see same production levels, same quota levels with better adherence maybe, or a slight reduction. So it comes at a crucial time, but not much will be happening. You say better adherence, but how do you make sure that better adherence happens? Well, you know, when the price is getting too low, which it now is for many of the countries, you know, Saudi Arabia is still fine because their production costs are low. But if you have higher production costs, it's starting to hit you, then you will probably start to think that it's a good idea to adhere to the quotas, and especially the countries that have asked for lower quotas, which is Iran, Venezuela, and Peru. They will certainly then sort of start to adhere to the production. Mark Lewis, what do you think about the meeting that's underway? Some say it's the most important in 6 years. And what do you think the impact will be, if any, on oil prices?
I think this is an important meeting. The oil price has been relatively stable over the last few years, 3 or 4 years. We've seen Brent ranging from around 105 to 115. And I think a lot of people had fallen into the trap of thinking that this was some sort of natural price that was going to last for a long time, and was planning on this and investing on the basis of this. I think the reality of it was that this price has been held there by one country in particular, that's Saudi Arabia, who really took on the role of the whole of OPEC, in effect, and balanced out the market. So when we lost production in Libya, Saudi Arabia increased production, and when Libya came back, when Iran went down, Saudi Arabia fluctuated its output around what we call its comfort zone of between around 8.5 and 10 million barrels a day, and it kept the market in balance. So we never saw a period of excess crude or shortage of crude which would have driven prices out of this sort of band. But I think this era, this cycle has now come to an end.
Because it seems that at the moment, which is unusual, excuse me jumping in here, it has nothing to do with supply and demand. We've got too much oil sloshing around and demand is at record highs.
No, demand is lackluster. Demand for oil this year will grow by less than 1 million barrels a day. US liquids production alone will have increased by around 1.5 million barrels a day this year. Now, you can't have a global market for anything at all where supply and demand are out of line in this way. There are problems is building up slowly but surely. And I think we've come to the crunch point. Well, the Saudis have pulled the plug on this a little earlier than we expected. We actually expected this to be happening next year rather than this year. But, you know, we were talking about this 2 years ago. We could see it arriving. The trajectory of US supplies and other supplies as well, which are growing, was just too much for the market to bear. Demand was just falling below expectations year after year.
Mikhail Krishin,
a very real problem.
All right. What do you think Russia is hoping to get out of this?
Well, I don't think Russia can get anything out of that, because right now most of the Russian experts do not expect any assistance to come from OPEC. They believe that the oil cartel is becoming powerless, and the meeting in Vienna is very important to show to the world that the powers of the organization to set artificial prices on the market are closing down, and the market is now the main factor, the demand and the supply factors. And for Russia that's very important, because in Russia we depend, our national budget is dependent 52% on revenues from oil and gas. Since Mr. Putin came to power in the year 2000, it was only 9% at that time, and it shows that the current Russian government has not made enough to diversify the national economy and to develop other industries. And if oil fails to produce the revenues, it will be a very heavy blow on the Russian financial system.
Well, let's talk about Russia more. Russia is not an OPEC member, but is ranked among the world's top 3 oil producers, along with the US and Saudi Arabia. Analysts say current oil prices are costing Vladimir Putin's government tens of billions of dollars. Rory Challens in Moscow has more.
OPEC's members have gathered in Vienna under very different circumstances from last year. A 3-year stretch of stability seems to be over. For Russia, these are troubling times. Russia isn't an OPEC member, but it is the world's second biggest oil producer. In 2013, energy products made up 68% of the country's export revenues. But Russia's 2015-2017 budget only balances with oil at a minimum of $100 a barrel. With current prices well below that, Moscow faces difficult choices: cut the budget, run a deficit, or dip into Federal Reserve funds. What it can't really do is push oil prices up by limiting production. Siberian temperatures would freeze many wells if they stopped pumping, and Russia doesn't have the storage capacity to keep significant quantities of crude off the market. Vladimir Putin hinted recently that the US and Saudi Arabia were deliberately depressing the price of oil to hurt Russia's economy. Finance Minister Anton Siluanov is concerned enough to have suggested drafting an alternate austerity 2015 to 2017 budget, taking into account zero growth and slumping oil revenues.
It is worth keeping some perspective here, though, because it's only in the last 3 or so years that oil prices of $100+ a barrel have become the norm. Over much of the last 2 decades, oil was actually mostly at about $20 or $30 a barrel. But this is all to do with what Russia has got used to, what Russia has planned for. And the falling price of oil, together with Western sanctions, mean the Kremlin is having to change its plans very quickly. Rory Challens, Al Jazeera, Moscow.
Mikhail, what do you make of those allegations that it's all a big geopolitical game and the US and Saudi Arabia are doing this deliberately to hurt Russia because of its stance in Syria and Ukraine?
No, I do not think so. First, I do not believe in conspiracy theories. And then I cannot imagine the current Obama administration to come to terms with American major corporations and strike a deal in arranging some sort of a political games with the prices of oil. That's impossible. I believe that's just political rhetoric and not a real thing.
What do you make of that, Cornelia? You seem to be nodding in agreement. I mean, there are a lot of people saying that this is also a game holding Iran at bay.
No, absolutely not. Oil Minister Naimi has come out a few weeks back saying, "Look, this is not a conspiracy theory. Absolutely not." I think one thing, though, is OPEC would not be unhappy if the low oil prices would mean that there's less investment in shale oil production, because shale oil costs more to produce than the conventional oil you find on the Arabian Peninsula, and therefore you would then have less production if you would have less investment. So I think there are some considerations going on, but there's certainly no grand coalition between Saudi and the US to push Russia into a corner.
Mark, there is speculation that shale industries would struggle if oil goes below $80 a barrel. At the same time, Saudi Arabia is looking to Asia.
Yeah, there's several factors at work here. I mean, it is basically supply and demand and the imbalance between the two that are driving this. But what has to come out of this is a cut in supplies. That's the only way the market's going to get back into balance, and prices will rise and maybe stabilise again. Perhaps not at the level that they were recently, but maybe back to $100 or so. But in order to get there, you're going to have a combination of voluntary cuts from OPEC. OPEC members will have to cut production. It doesn't look as though they're going to do it today. If they don't do it today, the price will go down further. We could see $60 or so. Within a couple of months, there should be some agreement. Further down the line, a little further down the line, you'll get economic cuts. And the importance and interest around US shale, as it's called, or tight oil, is that it is a relatively short lead time. It's not just that it's expensive. Deep water offshore production off Angola or something is much more expensive than shale oil. But it takes a long time to stop production there. It takes a short time to stop production in the US. So you'll get a process of voluntary cuts followed by economic cuts, primarily in the United States. But the question is what prices has to be. Our calculations suggest we need to go down to about $70 to do that.
And as you say, there has to be agreement. And I'm just wondering what sort of agreement there can be amongst the OPEC members, because OPEC was established as a counter to major multinational oil companies. The group was formed in 1960 with Iraq, Kuwait, Iran, Saudi Arabia and Venezuela as its founding members. Now, the group has grown over the years to take in 12 member states. OPEC nations try to work together to secure stable prices while ensuring regular supplies and a fair return on investment. Members enjoy what's called sovereign immunity, which means they're not bounded by competition law. And as we mentioned at the top of the show, the 12 OPEC members command about 80% of the world's crude oil reserves. Mikhail, there's a lot of speculation about how relevant OPEC remains today. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I believe for the past 8 years, when oil production globally increased from about 82 million barrels a day to 92 million barrels a day, most of the increase came from countries that are not members of OPEC. And OPEC was slowly losing its leverage over the global market. And right now, I believe, even they adopt a very dramatic resolution to cut down the production and export quotas, the world will react in a nervous manner for about a day or maybe a week, but then everything will stabilize. And if they actually cut down production, some other countries are going to replace their production on the global area. And I don't think it can affect the real equation between the supply and demand on the market.
Cornelia, talk us about the enormous disparities in the group. I mean, we've got Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait and Qatar who've got such enormous cash reserves. They can sit this out for, certainly in Saudi Arabia's case, for decades. Is it fair on the other members? How do you get that balance?
Well, you are right. It's a tale of two sorts of members. They're the members who have cash reserves and who have sort of reasonably inexpensive production. And then there are the members like Iran and Venezuela who have budgets that are really very stretched because they have a lot of subsidies in their country. So they actually do need a high oil price in order to balance their budgets. So yes, it's also those members who are always pushing to cut production, whereas Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states are much, much more relaxed.
And Mikhail, for Russia, on the other hand, it's difficult to give up a single dollar.
Yes, certainly. I think it is impossible to, for Russia, for example, to find any additional, any extra cash in the national wealth funds, in the sovereign funds, because everything has been already distributed, and there are no extra money in Russia to survive a period of very low prices. Moreover, I heard two Russian financial analysts estimate that if the price remains at the level of about $70 per barrel for a couple of years, the Russian financial system is going to collapse in the summer of 2017.
Yes, and of course there are those countries who've benefited and those who've lost due to the low price of oil. There's no doubt that Venezuela has benefited from the revenue generated by its oil, but it also serves as a good example of what can happen when prices drop. David Mercer has the second of our reports for this Inside Story.
It's the world's fifth largest oil exporter and has the largest proven reserves on the planet. But with oil prices falling to a 4-year low, Venezuela could be facing one of its most difficult tests yet. Oil makes up 95% of the nation's exports, and oil taxes are more than 40% of government revenues. With the price of crude hovering around $75 a barrel, the country's economy is shrinking rapidly.
Venezuela is perhaps the most oil-dependent country in the world. Oil is the only thing that brings in dollars. If used correctly, those dollars can generate growth and social well-being. But if misused, it creates populism. Where there's not enough dollars, you can't give people what they're used to, and popular unrest grows.
From the time he came into power, former President Hugo Chavez started using oil reserves to fund his socialist revolution. Government subsidies, price controls, and social programs helped lift millions of Venezuelans out of poverty. But over the years, government policies led to runaway inflation and shortages of basic goods. In February, protests erupted, with hundreds of thousands of people demanding the resignation of Chavez's successor, President Nicolas Maduro. With oil prices having dropped more than $30 since then, some argue Venezuela's policies have to change. A recent poll put President Maduro's approval rating at just 30%. And if oil prices don't rise, it could be just a matter of time before things in Venezuela go from bad to worse. David Mercer, Al Jazeera.
Cornelia, whether you like it or not, oil certainly is a commodity that affects everybody. Do you think it's time for change, though, now?
Well, I think, you said who has benefited. The consumers are benefiting. And, if you look at America's economy is recovering. So the consumers will benefit from this and have benefited from the lower oil prices. Some countries are the losers, and it is the Venezuelas, it is the Irans, and they obviously would really like to see lower production, would like to see change. OPEC is grappling with and has to adjust to the increasing shale production. And so this is an evolving story. This story is not ending here. It's an important meeting, but we will have a lot of meetings, probably in pretty short order following.
So yes, Mark, the lower oil price has obviously been good for the consumer. I mean, it has been described as a shot in the arm for the world's slowing economy, and Citigroup equated with a $1.1 trillion stimulus. Do you agree?
I think there's a definite positive element to lower prices. I mean, I think even in some of the producing countries, high prices have generated an awful lot of waste excessive consumption of various things, including oil. But on the consumer side, yeah, definitely it'll help the European economy recover. And this is one of the reasons we've seen weak demand numbers in the last few years. It'll help the Asian countries that are importers. Most of the high growth countries now are all importing. They can take this opportunity to remove subsidies off the pricing of their own oil products. And I think there's a range of benefits which will come from this. And I think, inevitably we are confronting a period of lower prices. It's a normal cyclical pattern in the oil industry, as your report mentioned. 10 years ago we had $25 a barrel. 6 years ago we had 145. I think we're looking at a period now where we're probably going to see $70 or $80 for a while. We'll adjust to that. The producers will adjust to it. They'll have to adjust to it. It's not all bad, though, even for them, and there are some definite benefits.
Mark, you talk about OPEC and what's happening in the world at the moment as a commodity market that has been camouflaged. And you say this might be the start of looking into other options. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think talking about the camouflaging of the impact on the OPEC members of what's happened in the last few years, because OPEC hasn't really operated as a cartel. It's most of the members, all of the members apart from Saudi Arabia, have produced as much oil as they can at any point in time, and they haven't had to adjust it, whereas Saudi Arabia has. And this has really hidden the problems that OPEC have had internally in terms of devising any sort of system of managing the market. And this process we're going through at the moment, maybe not this today at the meeting, but at the one following or at some stage in the next few months, they're going to have to re-establish a system by which they can manage the market in a more effective way than they have in the past.
Mikhail, if you look at what's going on and how much of this power is often perceived as being in the wrong hands, do you think it's time to stop subsidizing oil and put it into other industries now?
Well, where Russia is concerned, this is definitely correct. It should have been the governmental policy to encourage other industries and maybe do something with the restructure in the oil and gas industry. Instead of monopolization the industry in the hands of great and absolutely inefficient government-controlled corporations such as Rosneft and Gazprom, I think the government should have encouraged small producers who are going to assume some risks and develop very small reserves, very small reservoirs of oil instead of focusing on large ones, because there have been no great discoveries of oil fields in Russia. And if small companies are allowed to operate freely and with some encouragement from the government, I think Russian oil production would actually grow and bring more revenues to the national budget. Unfortunately, I do not see any signs of the government going to do something like that.
Cornelia, if there was this shift away from oil, how do you think it'll change the balance of power that we are seeing at the moment?
Well, I think the balance of power, there will be a shift towards oil, but I think the very relevant thing with low prices is low oil prices will mean less investment, not only in the oil industry, a lot of sort of the alternative, renewables industry and so on. The benchmark really is the oil price. The lower the oil price, the less investment in trying to find alternatives to oil. So the lower oil price will shift that balance as well.
What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I think we've already seen the effects of high prices have had on let's again look at Europe and look at the European agenda on environmental concerns. Now they've dropped down their agenda, their priority list, because the economy has become much more important. So we're seeing already, watering down of previous commitments on climate change and so on, because the prime concern at the moment is high energy costs. High energy costs are stifling the economic recovery. A reduction in oil prices will impact on gas in Europe as well and on coal, and we will see lower energy prices for a few years, and I think that will be a benefit. And then we can start reinvesting in alternatives a little way down the road when the economy is back on track.
A big thank you for talking us through the dynamics at play in Vienna at the moment. Cornelia Meyer In London, Mark Lewis, and in Moscow, Mikhail Krushin. Thank you very much for being with us on Inside Story. And we're always interested to hear your views on this Inside Story. You can post your comments at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or contact us on Twitter. Our handle is at AJ Inside Story. Mine at Jane Dutton. Big thanks for watching. Bye-bye for now.